Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 36 of Yorkshire Gamers Elite Big War Games podcast. And you will be unsurprised to know that this is the second part of the Henry Hyde episode that I talked about at the end of the first part of the Henry Hyde episode. So, more about that very shortly. Very little in the way of housekeeping to do. This is being released less than a week after the first part of the podcast. I have in between managed to record, hopefully, fingers crossed, an episode of the Christmas Brews in the Vineyard special, the traditional, as we've done it twice now. And I'm so glad that both Alex Sutherland and Sean Clark were available for the recording. I know a lot of you out there have been missing Sean from the airwaves after God's Own Scale sadly got put on hold. Let's call it that for now. Let's call it put on hold. So you'll be glad to hear Sean back on the airwaves, and the boys were on form. That's all I'm going to say. The litigation is flooding in already, even before the episode comes out. So that just takes us back to today's episode. And Henry, if you remember in the end of the first part, we had just finished the big game section. So coming up on this episode, we've got the usual features section with the quiz, Wargames Room 101 and Desert Island Wargame. And then we move on to the big topic at the end. And I did have a lot of plans for this final topic. But we'd already been going for about 4 hours at this point. And we only managed to really get a bit of a podcaster love in and talking about Henry's podcast and a few of our thoughts on podcasting in general. And there's a lot of stuff that I want to talk to. And if you listen to the last sort of 5 minutes of the podcast, you'll get an idea of where I'm going with that. Some quite serious stuff. Some stuff that's affected me over the years and Henry as well, and he is very vocal about mental health and physical health for us war gamers and for everyone in general, but specifically for us war gamers because that's where the our audience is. And I've had some difficult events over recent months, so it's important to me as well. And I didn't want to rush Henry. He had to go at 7 o'clock, which was about 10 minutes after we finished this recording, and I didn't think it was right to deal with such weighty subjects in a rushed manner. So Henry's going to come back on. Hopefully, I can get that fitted in springtime next year, and you may actually get a serious podcast for once. You never know. Anyway, without further ado, here's second part of interview. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is the feature section of the Yorkshire Gamer podcast. And the first part, as you all know, is our little quiz. And we always have to, because it always gets me into trouble, this quiz. We have to give that little disclaimer that this is how Yorkshire Gamer you are, not how good a gamer you are, just how Yorkshire Gamer you are. And you could be like Sean Clark, who managed to get a paltry 30%, or you could be like my mate Richard Harris, who got 95%. We are a broad church, as my friend Sean says. These answers to these, Henry, are either one or the other, or a yes or no. But
Okay.
we may disappear down a conversation on a couple of them as we tend to do.
Okay, mate.
So, are you ready to go?
Yep.
Okay. The first question is: go big or go home?
Go big.
Go big. Now, this is going to cause some trouble, I can tell already. Question 2, contrast paints. Are they great or are they a gimmick?
They are a useful tool.
You, you're sitting on the fence there, Henry. What are you doing? What are
Well,
you doing?
they're great in certain circumstances. If what you want to achieve is a speedy application of paint that looks pretty damn good to get stuff onto the table fairly quickly, they're great. The way I'm using, I had a conversation on Twitter with Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy.
Yeah.
about this the other day, and I was saying what I've realized I do with contrast paints is I treat them a bit, if you use an art analogy, it's like doing a sketch.
Mm.
And so I'll slop on some contrast paints, and sometimes, to your amazement, wow, that sketch looks really good. In
Yeah.
fact, it might even look good enough. Add a couple of bits like your metallics and whatever, and varnish over the top, base it, done. And there's other times when I think, oh, it's not a bad start, but actually I want to add some more detail or some more highlight or whatever, in which case out come the Vallejos, the Foundries, the other Citadels, whatever. So the answer really genuinely is it kind of depends. But as a new thing to add to our toolkit,
Yeah.
they're great.
I use black undercoat, so they're crap.
I switched from using a black undercoat so
Yeah.
that they would be effective.
There we go. There we go. I like that. So, first regionally biased question.
Yep.
At least I'm honest. So, choosing paintbrushes, do you have Winsor and Newton or Yorkshire made Pro Art?
Both.
Both.
Yep.
Oh, but separate. What do you use? What do you use the posh ones for?
The winter obviously kind of detail work. The Pro
Yeah,
Art are fantastic. You want to get your basic colors on using contrast paints or whatever. Pro Art absolutely fantastic.
made in
Also,
Skipton.
is that where they're made?
Made in Skipton, over the road from where I used to work.
Wow. Of course, what you haven't mentioned is not just Winsor and Newton. Is it Rosemary and Co?
Yes,
Beautiful brushes.
they're in a place called Cowling, which is about 3 or 4 miles away from Skipton,
So they're Yorkshire based as well.
in the Yorkshire paintbrush triangle.
What, the Yorkshire paintbrush
Well,
triangle?
I say that there's only 2 companies in it, so it's a bit of a flat triangle.
It's not an equilateral triangle, that's for
No,
sure. More
yeah,
isosceles,
yeah.
more. I was going to say rhododendron, but that's a flower, not a shape. Rhombus.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Yeah. So on balance, I'm kind of Yorkshire biased. I'd have to say that because
Oh,
Rosemary and
excellent.
Co. I support, Pro Art I support, but if you want the real class, you've
Yeah.
got
Oh,
Series 7 can't be beaten.
dear me. Stir me tea with them. Stir me tea with them.
All these people, their eardrums are being burst every time I laugh out loud here. I mean,
Question 4, more
yes,
controversy. 96 figures. Would you consider that an army or a unit of pike?
it's a battalion.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm glad you said that, Henry. Thank you.
At most, a very small brigade.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not an army. Not an
No, no way.
Right. I can feel the emails coming in already. I can feel them. Question 5. 6x4 table. Is that a big game or a small game?
Oh, now, given the conversation we had earlier, it depends what you put on it. If you put for me, Spencer Smith, it's a skirmish, you
Yeah.
know, me cowboys, whatever, it's a skirmish. If you're using 6 mil or let alone 2 mil, that could be an enormous game.
Good answer. You can tell you're not from Yorkshire because you're doing a lot of sitting on the fence. Question 6. Would you choose a points-based army or an historical order of battle?
Oh, historical order of battle, get away! Ugh.
Excellent,
It's one of
excellent.
the interesting point. We link it there just for a second because one of
Yeah,
the
of course.
things that I managed to avoid doing with my shot, steel, and stone rules was I avoided providing a points system.
Oh, you rebel,
Uh,
you.
you rebel, you, because I think what I actually did was I asked a couple of gamers I know, Brendan Morrissey and who else was it? Can't remember, to look at what they thought would be a balanced army for a couple of particular periods, Napoleonic and the American War of Independence. And so I gave a suggested army
Mm,
lists, but with no points attached, because my feelings is some of the greatest challenges and greatest enjoyment in our hobby can come from totally unbalanced games
yeah. Oh,
where you have a
definitely.
small force taking on a bigger force, that using a point system, it would have to be an extremely elaborate and cleverly conceived point system to make it possible. And not all games are supposed to be fair. I
Yeah,
think that's the other thing, that what you do is you think about the context of the game. But this is why I love campaigns, Ken.
yeah,
So that players are prepared to say, do you know what? I might just sacrifice that unit to hold up that enemy division in the past there, which under a normal, Wednesday night club, it's like, oh no, I don't want to do that because I'm going to get trashed. But in a campaign context, yeah, well, if I do that, that means the rest of my core could circle around and take them in the flank, and so points based, schmoints based,
yeah,
basically.
exactly. I am proud to say that I have never played a points-based game in my entire, how long is it now? 40 odd years of wargaming.
Right.
And when, and only when, somebody produces a piece of papyrus or similar that says something along the lines of, and Alexander the Great decided to go to speak with Darius prior to the battle, and he
Yeah.
said, "You've got too many scythe chariots. That's at least 1,000 points." And
Yeah.
Darius says, "Well, you need to take a unit of companion cavalry off, or else or else we're not fighting." Then I'll use points.
The only context in which it has a role to play is, of course, in fantasy gaming, where you're talking about two completely unknown elements. But the thing is, when you look at over the years, elephant in the room, Games Workshop, Warhammer,
Mm,
where over the years, depending on which edition of the rules you're talking about, they vary how many points a particular unit must be worth, because they've adjusted the values or the capabilities of other units, which then
mm,
unbalances other units. Basically, you're making point systems, you're making a huge bed of nails for yourself.
yeah,
That's one of those things, because there's always going to be someone who says, yeah, but in this sort of situation, because they're a very, what's a warhammer, if they're a very shooty unit, uh but basically they should be cost more points because they can inflict casualties sooner on my very choppy unit, so my
yeah,
choppy unit can't get to that shooter unit. And then the rules decide, well, yeah, but if you do get to them, you're going to hack them to pieces. So, and it just becomes this never ending circular argument of what's
mm,
worth more than something else, because there's no real historical context upon which to
yeah,
base it.
yeah. It leads to that. Um, I'm going to use these troops because they're more value. They're more likely to give
Yes.
me a victory. Whereas most of the war gamers that I game with will go, "Oh, they've got nice hats. Can I use those?"
Yeah.
Regardless of how good they are. I mean, I've got this unit of Italian spearmen for the Italian wars, and they're
Yeah.
already 50 years out of date when the Italian wars starts, but
Yeah.
they look really, really good. And they're
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely, I stick them behind a wall in all the games so that they can't get injured in any way, shape, or form.
Because
Anyway,
there's another thing as well. Again, bless his heart, might have been Andy Callan who mentioned this as well. The reality is, historically, a general had to use what they were given.
yeah,
And at any one point, half your units could go down with dysentery. Oh, bloody hell. The guards, they're all sitting on the latrines. They can't come to play today. Oh my God, the cavalry's run out of fodder. The horses are half starved. All my beautiful heavy cavalry, or in the French in the Peninsular War, all my heavy cavalry have got saddle sores because we haven't trained the cavalry how to look after their horses properly, for example. Or half that column's been sniped to pieces by partisans. The general has to use what they're given, and there's a case to be made that completely the opposite of point systems.
mm.
You should be forced to draw cards from a hat, you know,
Ooh,
and
random.
you only get a unit if it's a picture card kind of thing,
Oh, nice. I like that.
right?
I like that.
What can you do? So, yeah, he's been lucky. He's drawn 6 picture cards, so he's got 6 units. You've only drawn 4. You've only got 4 units, and then we'll randomly decide what those units are. Now, that would be as historically correct as anything else. Certainly, point systems are just, they have their place, I suppose, in contest games or whatever,
Yeah.
depending on the context. But then I'm not a competition gamer, never have been, never want to be a competition gamer. So for and I can see that. Oh, here's a big word in a purely ludological sense, right?
Ooh. Mm.
And to
Mm.
do with games design, there is a place for point system depending on the context in which that game is being played. But in a historical context, they're complete nonsense.
Excellent, excellent. Right, that's going to get us a few emails. I like that one. Question 7, 12 minutes, and we're on
Go on then, go on.
question
This is
7.
quick fire round, isn't it?
Quick fire. When you're doing your painting, do you use a wet palette or an old bit of MDF to mix your paint?
I use a dry palette. I
Dry
use
palette.
an artist's ordinary cheap plastic palette or a plate, an old
Oh yeah,
white china plate.
yeah.
Um,
Tiles are tiles are quite popular as well.
yeah. I've got a wet palette, which I almost never use. I keep forgetting I've got it. Because I've got so used to just dispensing the quantity I need of paint for the session I'm going to be painting, and so a wet palette. I suppose if you knew you're going to be doing multiple sessions and you'd mixed a specific color and you need to keep that color available over several painting sessions. All right, I can see that.
Mm.
But there's another thing I do. It's called having a notebook where I literally write down, this is how I mix this color, kind of thing. I painted their epaulets that color. And nowadays, we were talking about paints earlier. Mate, you can get any color you want under the sun
Yeah,
in a little tube. So just squeeze a bit of it onto the palette, and if you need more, squeeze a bit more. You know,
exactly. Wise advice. Wise advice. Oh, I think you've just changed your answer on this one. Undercoat figures, black or white?
I used to undercoat black. I've switched to undercoating white.
No
Sorry.
worries. No worries. I think you might get the next one wrong as well. So, you're after a drink, a hot drink. Do you go for Yorkshire tea or dirty mucky coffee?
I'm such a southerner. I'm on the fence. It depends. It wouldn't be Yorkshire tea, darling. It would
Would it
be
not?
Assam. I'm a fan of
Oh,
Assam tea. It's such a southerner, aren't I? Wussy
yeah,
southerner. Assam tea. But my beverage of choice is uh really good strong coffee. I'm
coffee.
a
Yeah.
I'm a Lavazza man, but I also, I'm Ponzi, I float around different. I've started buying my own beans and grinding my own beans from different suppliers. What can I say? I'm a southerner.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I had a bit of a tea lecture on the last podcast with this one
Did
because I
you?
spoke to Rohan Saravanamuttu, who was
Yeah.
born in Ceylon.
Oh wow.
So it was like, let me tell you about tea, lad.
Oh my god. Stand back.
So that was
Yeah, no,
brilliant.
it's
That was
definitely.
brilliant.
My favorite coffee is, there's an Italian manufacturer called Lavazza,
Yeah,
and I fell in because my sister lives in Italy. I
yeah.
should add that. So
Oh,
when
brilliant.
I was in my very early teens, went to visit my sister in Italy for the first time, and the first time I was, and she should never have given it to me at that age, but an espresso coffee made with Lavazza at just sheer perfection, and then discovering more since then. Coffee's in my blood,
Coffee
quite
all the way,
literally,
mate.
mate.
Coffee
Quite
all the
literally.
way. No worries. We're on to question 10 after a mere 15 minutes.
Yeah,
And this one, this one is War Games units. If it's
yeah.
historically correct, do you like your figures tightly packed or socially distanced?
Oh, tightly packed.
Tightly
I'm a
packed.
shoulder to shoulder kind of guy.
Brilliant. That's what I like to hear. That's what
Oh
I like
God,
to
yeah.
hear.
It irks me. There's a good word. It irks me when I
Irks.
see a unit that's supposedly portraying a unit that would have deployed shoulder to shoulder, but the miniatures are like three-quarters of an inch or an inch apart. It's like, what's that? That's
Yeah. That,
not, because this comes back to, oh no, because I've decided what I'm going to put in room 101 when we come to it. So we'll come back to that.
come
But
back to this. Come
shoulder
back
to
to this.
shoulder, mate.
Shoulder to
Shoulder
shoulder.
to shoulder.
Excellent. That's what we like to see. You have a choice of a 2 hour club game or a weekend monster game. Which would you choose?
Oh, weekend monster game.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Now we have a question that literally divides the country. So I think I know what your answer is going to be for this. Um, and this comes from Nick Skinner from the Two Fat Lardies.
Oh yeah.
And this is avocado. Are they just posh mushy peas?
Wow. Yes.
Yes, yes. I think you're the first person south of Birmingham who said that. To
Really?
be fair, yeah.
Now I think because round here, oh yeah, crushed avocado on toast or whatever is all over the
Yeah.
place, and it's just like, I mean, first of all, I'm starting to have ethical objections about avocados. Do you know how much water it takes to grow a single avocado? It's like 20 liters, right?
Wow.
And in a world that's worried about climate change and stuff, do you know what? I switch to mushy peas or what are they called, edamame beans or whatever, which are like soybean
Ah,
type
very
things,
good.
and
Very good.
they taste pretty much as good as avocado. I like a nice avocado, but I do think that they are so hugely overrated and over
Mm,
popularized, and quite often you could use whether mushy peas or some other form of
mm.
crushed pea condiment in their place.
Excellent. Well, there are small pockets of avocado use within Yorkshire, around around areas like Harrogate, and Ilkley and Otley,
Oh
and all
dear, dear,
these
dear,
posh bits.
dear.
But most
They're well
places,
fenced off, are they? Well fenced
yeah,
off.
they are. They keep themselves to themselves. Whereas normally, it's mushy peas. I don't know if you remember. Do you ever remember the Yorkshire Airlines sketch that Hale Pace did
No, I
years
don't
ago?
remember that.
Oh,
No.
look it up on YouTube. It is
Okay.
absolutely hilarious because there's a bit where you see a row of seats with people sat there and they've got some food as you would do on an
Yeah,
airline,
yeah.
and then the air hostess comes down the line and slaps massive amounts of mushy peas on top of everyone. And then it goes, and in first class, we have a more refined dinner. So, same again, but with like a posh dinner. And then the
Yeah.
same lady comes on and slaps this massive load of mushy peas on top. Oh,
Oh
dear
dear.
me. Anyway, so the universal question so far, Henry, there's no pressure on you, but 35 episodes in, everyone has answered this the same way. And this is round dice, spherical dice. Are they allowed or banned on your table?
Spherical dice. Never seen one.
Have you not seen that? Oh, I'm introducing you to a new world of hurt.
And they would be banned immediately.
Excellent.
I can go because of Dungeons and Dragons. I can go as far as a few polyhedra, but
Yeah,
as purely spherical dice, get out of here. Not
get out.
interested.
Brilliant. I love it. Thank you, Henry. You've kept our 100% record for that. So no pressure on my next guest. You're going down the chip shop for a meal. Would you have haddock or cod?
Haddock.
Haddock. Ooh. Old school here. Question 15. Would you or do you enjoy a good table and a set of rules, like a casualty table where you're cross-referencing stuff, or are you more six and you're dead?
Oh gosh. I prefer simplicity.
Do you?
I prefer buckets of dice.
Bucketsofdice.com.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent. Question 16, more controversy. 28 mil is king, yes or no?
Oh.
Oh, it's a big fence you've got there, Henry.
False.
False. Ooh,
30 mil is king.
30 mil is king. Not 32.
30.
30. 30 mil is king.
Spencer Smith's, Holger Ericsson's,
Oh, yeah. See where you're coming from.
30 mil. Krantara, Minden, all those manufacturers. Some people call it 156 or something nowadays as
Yeah,
well, don't they? 30
classic.
mil, I think, is truly king. But I think that 28 and 6 mil are
Mm,
worthy princes.
brilliant. That's what we like to hear. So, like Joe Root is the current crown prince of Yorkshire. Um,
Yeah.
So, question 17. Unpainted miniatures, are they allowed on the table? Yes or no?
Not now.
Not now.
Used to be, but not now.
Not
If people want to do it in the privacy of their own home, that's up to them. But now I passed that partly because the yeah, just kind of my own pride in, if I'm
now.
going to put on a game, I want it to look pretty, and I no longer there were yeah, I've had my time doing with unpainted miniatures. I now want
Yeah.
painted miniatures on the table.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear. Question 18. I don't know if you follow football at all, Henry, but this is Bradford City or Leeds United. I'm wearing a Bradford City top just in case you needed a hint.
Brighton.
Brighton.
Brighton and Hove Albion.
Brighton and Hove
Do you know? But
Albion.
here's the thing: I don't follow football at all.
You
I was a
don't?
rugby guy.
Yeah.
I was a rugby union player, and football. I get semi-interested sometimes when the World Cup comes round.
Hmm.
Um, Here's a confession: I don't know how many of your listeners would confess to. Actually, I prefer women's football.
Oh, okay.
I was so impressed. I've been so impressed with the women's tournaments in recent years, and the lack of hissy fits, the fact that they take a tackle, they get up again, get on with the game. None of this diving and just yeah. Anyway, that's my answer.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Used to be
I
Leeds United though. I will say because
dirty
when I was a
Leeds.
lad, I was a king goalkeeper.
Ah,
And
yes.
Gary Sprake of Leeds
Gary
United.
Sprake. Wow, we're
Remember
going
that?
back there. Yes, I do. I
Yeah.
remember Gary
Gordon
Sprake.
Banks was actually my top man. Stoke City, of course. But Gary Sprake was in there. Absolutely. Peter Bonetti of Chelsea.
Yeah, yeah.
Top goalkeepers, one and all.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Right. Question 19. Yorkshire or the other place over the hill?
Yorkshire.
Excellent. Excellent.
Largely because I've spent almost no time at all at the other place over the hill.
Yeah, you're not allowed to say it on this podcast.
No, I'm not. So Yorkshire.
That's the one word you can say any swear word you can say, but you say the
But
L
not
word and
not that word.
it
No,
gets
no.
bleeped
If
out.
I'm booking a holiday, I'll up in that part of the country. It would be Yorkshire every time.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And the final question, Henry. GW, Games Workshop, are they the work of the devil? Yes or no?
No,
No. Right,
no.
let's have a
We owe a huge debt of gratitude to Games Workshop. I've just bought. It's a book called Dice Men, I think it's called, by Ian
yes, yeah.
Livingstone, one of the founders. Sir, I should say, Sir Ian Livingstone, as he now is, one of the
There's chance for you
founding.
yet, Henry. There's chance for you yet.
um, no, I'm from Essex. They and it looks like being a fascinating read. It's as much a coffee table book as it is a history of games works, but it's actually fascinating. And when we think of all the historical wargaming talent that earned their chops working for Games Workshop,
Mm.
think of everyone who loves Black Powder. Yeah, all those guys worked for Games Workshop, folks. You love Perry Miniatures. They were Games Workshop. Rick Priestley in Israel, Games Workshop,
Workshop.
Warlord Games. They worked for Games Workshop. There's so many people in the historical industry who cut their teeth working for, you know, the elephant in the room, as it were. Yeah, we've got to be grateful to them. I think one of the struggles we have is making the correlation between, how many gamers can we say really started playing Warhammer and some people would say graduated to
Mm.
playing historical games. I think that's not so easy to factor in, and I think that might just be a bit of a red herring, actually. But certainly making people aware of the hobby of wargaming in general, of tabletop wargaming in general, in the high street, meant that it's at least, when those of us who love historical gaming have been out there and talked about it, people have at least been able to say something like, "Oh, do you mean like Warhammer?" And
Yeah,
that at least is a starting point for a conversation.
yeah. It's
So yeah,
brought it into the public conscience.
yeah, they're not the devil's spawn, but I wish I had their asking money, that's for sure.
Yeah, same here, same here. Well, thank you very much for that, Henry. Those 20 questions spark off loads of little mini conversations about
Of course, yeah.
loads of little bits. And 65%, which is very reasonable. Very
All right, thank
reasonable
you very
indeed.
much. Thank
Very
you.
reasonable indeed.
That's very decent.
So that's high enough to not be embarrassed, and low enough to, if anyone says, you're not bloody like that Yorkshire gamer lad, are you? You bloody and you go, well, no, actually, I'm only 65% on
Exactly.
Yorkshire. So
Not bad for a southerner is how you'd
yeah,
probably put it.
yeah. And you ace the avocado question, which for north of Birmingham is a rare thing. What
Yeah.
can I say? What can I
Yeah.
say? So we move on to the next part of the feature section, and this is our Wargames Room 101, and this
Yeah.
is where we've had a rant earlier from Henry, which was extremely entertaining, and this is for the listeners. George Orwell's Room of Horror that was turned into a TV show, and you're able to put your deepest, darkest fear in there, and it's consigned to that room and banished forever.
Yeah.
We've had 13 entries into the vault so far. So,
Mm.
Henry, this is your chance. It's a broad church. We're not here to offend anyone, but we all have our little pet hates that sometimes drive us a little bit mad.
I might have
Uh,
to squeeze in two.
ooh. You can try and persuade me. Go on.
The first one,
Mm.
unpainted base edges. Giles
Oh,
Allison was talking about unpainted edges. I'm
yeah,
with him on that.
yeah,
The number of people who do beautiful terrain work on the top of their 2 mil thick or whatever it is MDF bases
yeah.
and leave the edges bare. No! At least paint them green or brown or black or something, because there's nothing spoils the look of a beautifully painted more than the edges of those bases just sticking up like lumps out of the table. And the second thing, probably that's just kind of a minor, like,
Mm.
because it's like they've gone to all that trouble with the rest of the unit and then they've missed the edge of the base. Can't
Well,
stand that.
just before we go on to the second one, um, how would you feel then about? I don't know exactly how to word this, but badly painted edges. So let's say you've got a lovely, luxurious grassland game mat, and your edges to the bases are so luminous green that you need to wear sunglasses playing your opponent.
Yeah, that's equally crap. I
Is that
totally agree. People need to think about, well, it needs to at least match the basing that I've done on the, because people will have put tufts and little puddles and little bits of cork bark rubble and all that stuff, and then just a nasty rough cut bit of MDF edge, or as you say, luminous green or something ghastly. Make it kind of blended. I mean, I've got a thing about bases that are over thick. Anyway, for the longest time, one of the biggest bugbears I had about a lot of Warhammer fantasy gaming was the plinth bases of
yeah?
figures. It's taken me a long time to get over that. And I still have to admit a bit of a twitch. You know, when it comes to my 18th century, I found this wonderful, incredibly thin, like 0.5 mil plywood bases that basically means they're pretty much sitting on the tabletop, but giving you the advantage of being able to move them around. It's the whole basing. Oh, I'll have to come back on the show and talk for a couple of hours about basing. That's a whole thing in itself.
Well,
Whole
it
thing in
was
itself.
it was Simon Miller's choice was oversized Sabo bases,
Yeah.
and I have to say it's something that I hadn't really picked up on until Simon mentioned it, and
Oh,
now every time I see it, it's like two big red arrows pointing.
yeah. Yeah. Oversized, particularly over thick bases.
Yeah.
Just and but this ties in with what I really want to put into room
Okay.
101.
Okay. Let's go. Let's go.
It is the, in inverted commas, accuracy nerds, right?
Ooh.
Because I used that word plausible deliberately several times
Yeah.
earlier in the show, and I've used it all over the place because you will get people claiming, "Oh, yeah, this game's incredibly accurate." So why are your figures on 5 millimeter thick bases then? It looks like shit, right? Why are your figures spaced 2 inches apart and they're supposed to be in close order? It looks awful.
Yeah.
Accuracy to me, or you have to have the look and feel of the
Yeah.
game right.
Yeah.
And this is actually circling right back. This is where often big games win out because they at least bear a passing resemblance to their as a facsimile of the historical thing
Yeah.
where you it's one of those things where, of course, and I bet dear Pete Berry, hello Pete if you're listening, and a good Yorkshireman, of course,
He
Sheffield,
is. Yeah. Yeah.
he'll be listening and jumping up and down because, of course, this is where the micro scales can win out, where you can actually have huge battalions that look like the real thing. Painting them needs a particular kind of challenge, and I think of a Canadian guy who I published several articles by in Battle Games back in the day, Bob Barnettson. I don't know if he's
Mm.
still wargaming at all, but if he listens to this, hello Bob. I don't know if you're still in the hobby. If you are, always admired the fact that you said, yeah, well, what I do, a lot of people would say, okay, I'm playing using 28mm miniatures, 1 inch equals 10 yards, and so I'll put 48 figures in that
Mm.
battalion.
Yeah.
Sod that, I'll have 200 figures in that battalion because then, oh my god, that looks much closer to how it would have really been. And one of the things that we often have to encounter as war gamers is our historical war games on the tabletop often more accurately are facsimiles of historical reenactments, right?
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
anyone who's been to reenactments knows that, all right, so this is the Battle of Edgehill, but there's 50 blokes, right?
Yeah.
And most of them are wearing welding gloves, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
That's my reenactment bugbears in it. But when it comes to historical, the whole accuracy thing, people are claiming that what I'm portraying here is more accurate than what you're portraying there.
Yeah.
And the fact is, if we're honest, all of us are making compromises somewhere down the line. And where does the accuracy stop anyway? What is it? The question we need to be asking is actually, what is it about this historical period, about this specific battle? What is it I'm trying to represent? Am I trying to represent the visual spectacle of the battle? In which case, this is, of course, where big games
Mm.
win out. I mean that even where you've got big games with smaller miniatures on
Mm.
smaller tabletops, but you're talking about portraying the battle in its visual form
Mm.
more accurately. But even then, do you really want to put? I can't see any entrails on your tabletop. I can't see any horses running around,
Mm.
neighing with half a leg blown off. Do you really want to portray that? You're doing modern gaming. Do you really want to show guys who've just been hit by an IED? Is that
Mm.
really what? How?
Mm.
So, what do you mean by? Oh no, I don't mean that accurate. I mean, well, I'm doing this bit accurately, right? So, how accurately? How many gamers actually represent the weather in their war games?
Mm.
Seriously. One reason why I wrote the campaigns book is like, here's an opportunity, at least in the strategic setting, where you really can show
Mm.
the effect of weather on your games. That, man, if it's winter, half you guys might freeze to death. Your tanks aren't going to go. The tracks freeze up. The running gear gets buggered, whatever. So the fact is, we're all making compromises.
Mm.
And we already used the example earlier where someone's, oh, I think you'll find that, between March and April of
Yeah.
1807, they used a different shade of indigo dye for the French uniforms. Oh, get lost, mate. That's because what we're talking about there is, frankly, in the nicest possible way, being slightly on the spectrum.
Mm,
where people are more concerned with order and systems and organization in their hobby, in their portrayal of events, than in the actual events themselves.
yeah.
And I think we all have to be wary of that because it's so easy. It's, even the best of us can stray into that. When you're researching a period in detail and you're starting to paint your armies in detail, you're actually having to make a decision about, oh, crikey, all right, I've got to make some sort of cutoff point. Things look really pretty, for your Italian wars. They look really good in that slot of time. So I'm going to kind of paint in accordance with that slot of time
Mm,
to the best of my ability. So, because what you're doing is you're actually creating as accurate an impression as you can
mm.
of warfare of the time, rather than a literally down to the day. Oh, it's 11 o'clock. It's February the 3rd, 1472, kind of accurate. Oh yeah, and Bill Bloggs, who was in that regiment of archers, left behind his breastplate plate that day, so I better leave his breastplate off. No,
No.
because as you say, okay. Yes, I am doing Pavia with this unit, but I'm also doing this other battle, and I'm doing this campaign set in this slightly different period. I'm not going to sit there and paint another 5,000 figures.
Yeah,
I'm going to
exactly.
use the same figures over and over again, which is what we all do.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether you're talking big battles, historical battles, or you're talking, what I'm doing at the moment, Dungeons and Dragons. I've just painted like 50 civilians, right? Lovely miniatures, bought them off Etsy, great things. And I made a decision at that moment, right? Well, Jane, the shepherdess, is wearing a green dress. Right? I'm not gonna, "Oh, right, next time we play, shit, I need to repaint it because she's gonna put on a red dress." No, we all make compromises, and the same when it comes to weapon effects and stuff. You could say, well, theoretically, a brown bess musket could be fired up to, say, 4 times a minute by very highly experienced
Mm,
troops with the best possible quality powder, with musket balls that were all beautifully cast in perfectly flat, calm conditions on a parade ground. But they're not going to be doing that with that huge French column of grenadiers coming at them through the fog on this day, up the top of a Spanish hill in 1808, where the bloke next to him's just had his head blown off. So what exactly do you mean by accurate? Right? So if I've got anything to put into room 101, it is the accuracy fanatics,
oh,
because
lovely.
what we all need to do is admit that we're we're creating an impression, hopefully a convincing, and I use that word again,
Mm,
plausible impression of what actually was possible historically, but there's no way we can say that what we're doing is
mm,
actually accurate. Because as soon as Napoleon wins Waterloo, uh,
mm.
not accurate.
Not accurate anymore. Exactly. Well, that was a lovely and wonderfully argued entry, and of course, the vault is opening behind me now, and they are being put in there along with primary school blue rivers and unpainted edged flags and competition games and all the other things that have gone in there over the previous episode. So thank you very much for that, Henry.
You're
Very,
welcome.
very good indeed. And that just leaves us with our final feature, and this is relatively new. And this is the Desert Island Wargame. So you'll be familiar, I would imagine, with the Desert Island Discs program on. This is still on Radio 4. I think it's Radio 4.
Yeah.
Um, and very similar to that. The first part is that you get to have a Desert Island Wargame. And it can be any game, it can be any number of players, any scale, any period, any size. What would be your perfect war game?
Wow. I suppose if I'm stuck on a desert island, there's going to be an element of kind of nostalgia, memories of home. So I'm going to point up at that book on my shelf again, The War Game by Charles Grant. A game that I was lucky enough to actually do at Partisan back in, oh my God, when was it? 2006 or thereabouts,
Yeah.
where um, I and Phil Ollie and Steve Gill and John Priest, who we called ourselves the Wargamers, staged the Battle of Molwitz, 1741, that featured in the late Charles Grant original book, The War Game, 1971. And we got to play it with the original Spencer Smith miniatures and
Wow.
the balsa wood buildings built by Charles Grant, with a game that was co-organized with Charles Stewart Grant, still alive,
Yeah. Yeah.
retired Brigadier Charles Stewart Grant, and sadly the late Stuart Asquith. And being able to restage that game at Partisan uh, with the original stuff was just one of the magic moments of my wargaming life.
Brilliant.
And if I was able to take that collection and stuff, and because it would be quite simple to do, because they were contour stepped hills, plain green tabletop, balsa wood buildings. That I would say would probably keep me happy for the rest of my time, because there were enough units involved that I could set up all kinds of different games. The canister cones, the howitzer
Oh,
burst
canister
circles made from
cones.
wire and stuff. Plenty of D6s. I think that would help me to see out my days if I was stuck on the
Fan-
desert island, mate.
Fantastic choice.
I think
Fantastic
that would
choice.
have to be it.
Brilliant. And second thing, obviously, apart from a religious book, you're allowed to take a book with you. Would it be along the same lines?
I could easily take a copy of the war game. I know the rules pretty much off by heart. And they would just fit on a bit of paper. I
Yeah.
could be egotistical and say, "Oh, I'll take my own 2 books. Thank you very much
Yeah.
indeed."
Yeah.
Largely because by the time you finish writing the book, you've mostly forgotten what you you wrote at the beginning. Trust me. But no, the book I would take with me is a book by the now incredibly sadly late
Mm.
great historian Christopher Duffy,
Yeah. Recently
and it's
passed
called
away.
the
Yeah.
book would be The Military Experience in the Age of Reason, because I think that is a book that for me and many others bridged that gap. We often say that history is a different country,
Mm.
and one of the things that's always fascinated me about reading about military history is, wow, how the hell did those guys just stand there and blaze away shoulder to shoulder and put up with the privations and the discipline and stuff? And probably I think that's one of the greatest history books I've ever read.
Mm.
So off the top of my head, that's the one I'm going to choose. The
Brilliant.
Military Experience in the Age of Reason by Christopher Duffy.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And finally, is a war games unit. It doesn't have to be one that you own. It can be one from history. It can be one you've seen in a magazine. Not that I'm suggesting you go out and steal it, but what's the one war game unit that maybe you have the best memories of that you would love to take?
Oh, dead easy. It's my own Regiment von Eintopf,
Yeah.
the first Musketeers of Prunkland's army, with its attached company of grenadiers. Uh, Absolutely. And of course, its very famous Colonel Oberst von Arschloch. Uh,
Wow.
Which caused quite a stir many, many years ago, when it was 86 or whatever it is, when I had my first article published in Miniature War Games featuring the Wars of the Faltinian
Mm.
Succession. And Regiment von Eintopf was there. And all my unit commanders have got fairly fruity names of one kind or another, but in German.
Yeah.
And Duncan didn't spot this until it had already been published, and he started to get letters from German readers of miniature war games.
Oh
And
wow.
he sent me, because he did back in those days, he actually did send out checks for your articles.
Mm.
He seemed to have lapsed in that in later years, and some people were left unpaid for their efforts. But he'd sent me a check for my article, and he said, "Oh yeah, would love to have more articles from me, Henry, but but please warn me in advance, or change the names of your units, because it wasn't only von Arschloch there. I also, and apologies to any German. No, he lets words go through. There was a Hussar unit called von Vielficken Hussars,
Yeah.
which, in case you don't speak German, means the fuck a lot Hussars.
Oh,
And
brilliant.
which is what Hussars do, of course.
Yeah.
But anyway, the war game unit I would take with me then would be Regiment von Eintopf, my glorious, huge unit of Spencer Smiths. I think that unit's got something like 60 figures in it,
Yeah.
including all the supernumerary officers and everything. That would kind of sums up my imagination, and that will keep me happy for the rest of the time.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that. Lovely feature section. Got loads of information there from Henry. That was really, really nice. So we'll have another short break for the audience now, and we shall be back shortly. Okay. By now, I would imagine that your children have got a year older, and maybe your dog needs feeding. I would go and check because
It's
we're
only three
still.
and a half hours, mate, so
Ah,
far.
it's I said this on one of the previous podcasts that when it's like when the pole vaulter runs up and doesn't plant the pole and go over the top. We're kind of going towards the record, but we're not actually going for it.
Oh, dear,
I think
dear,
that'd be
dear.
good. That'd be a good charity thing, wouldn't it? A
It would.
charity podcast for the longest ever war games related podcast. And
Uh,
get some money for charity. But there we go. So in this final section, we kind of have a big topic, or we talk about various things. And as we said at the start, Henry's got such a massive catalogue of stuff that he's done and things he's been involved in, that it's quite hard to try and break that down into a manageable session. So what I decided to do was we'll talk a little bit about an article that Henry did recently, and it was quite it was a really good article, if you don't mind me saying,
Thanks.
and it certainly had me thinking a lot about various things, and it wasn't easy in parts to read, but I think maybe we need to challenge certain things. Um, to maybe confront those things. And if you're up for it, Henry, we'll talk about various
Yeah, yeah.
things that have happened to you, because I think that can bring hope to other people out there who are going through similar things. I've just made a very few brief notes, more than I would normally, less than I would normally do, and
Mm.
I think the last three sections have shown that we're not going to run out of things to talk. So I think we will be all right. So the first thing I thought we would do, especially for our friends on the internet who like podcasters talking to podcasters, is I thought we'd have a little bit of a podcast loving to start
Yeah.
with. So when did you first become involved in podcasting? Obviously, it's been a while you've been doing it. So
Yeah, well,
what
it
did?
was Neil Shuck, wasn't it? Neil Shuck and his Meeples and Miniatures show, which is now, God, we have to really turn the clocks back, don't we? I was still running Battle Games magazine at the time,
Yeah.
and still owned Battle Games magazine. Um, so it would have been in, oh crikey, I don't know, 2008, something like that. And I remember what it was that Neil asked to place an ad in the magazine for Meeples
All
and
right.
Miniatures.
Okay.
And I was like, "Oh, what's that?" He said, "Oh, it's a podcast." And I was like everyone is, a what? Oh, what's a podcast? Oh, well, it's this. It's like a radio show, but it's not live, and you're kind of talking and record it, and you put it out
Mm,
through whatever. And of course, podcasting back then, to his enormous, it was in its
yeah.
infancy. Neil was a real kind of broke the ground there for us. So I said, "Oh, yeah, sure, okay. If you put an ad in there for you, happy
Mm,
to, help you get this
yeah.
thing off the ground." And I think I was. even helped him. He asked me to help him design his first Meeples and Miniatures logo or something back then. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll do that. Happy to help out. And then it became, oh, well, would you like to? Because he was doing it all kind of solo at the time, I think. He said, oh, well, would you like to come on the show? And I said, oh, yeah, okay. How do you do that? And so I think, because again, Skype was in its early days back then, and we did it all over Skype. And what he realized was he'd found someone who can talk. And I had huge admiration for Neil, because what I didn't, because obviously we corresponded via email and stuff. What I didn't realize was he had a speech impediment, and doing the podcasting was one way that helped him build confidence and overcome the speech impediment.
Yeah.
Because also because you record something and then you can edit it. He was a rigorous editor, because it meant he could cut out a lot of the ums and ahs and the stammers and this kind of stuff. And so for him, it was this extraordinary process that in his head, enabled him to sound normal, coherent. And I had, huge admiration for him. It's like, wow, that's an amazing thing he's doing. How brave is that? Quite extraordinary. But at the same time, he and I just kind of clicked. We came from very different wargaming backgrounds. He did a lot more kind of board games, games in a box, fantasy gaming, card games, that kind of stuff. And I, of course, Mr. Boring Spencer Smith, that everyone, oh God, not bloody Spencer Smith again. But yeah, I've got a sense of humor enough about myself that I know that a lot of people go, oh Jesus, not Henry, bloody Spencer Smith again. But what we found was what we had in common was our love of the hobby in general. And so that's how it started. I went on a Meeples and Miniatures show, and the thing that blew us both away, that first show got an enormous response. Neil was rocked, his listening numbers kind of rocketed up, and I was like, wow, really? And it was just, I think, that combination of me and him and the people just kind of realizing it was a bit like listening to a couple of blokes having a conversation down the pub or something like that,
Yeah.
chewing the cud about the hobby. And because our interests were so diverse, it meant we covered a huge amount of ground. And obviously, I was able to bring in the whole experience of what it's actually like to run a Wargames magazine, which was enlightening for a lot of people. A lot of people suddenly realizing, oh, it's quite hard then, isn't it? Yes, and bloody scary and terrifying and, all that.
Yeah.
And so it kind of gave people an introduction behind the scenes of the hobby that they'd not really kind of had before. Because also from my perspective, Neil was getting guests on his show, and I was interviewing people from the magazine, and obviously talking to people to get them to advertise and stuff. And so people were getting an insight into, wow, these people who run the hobby, they're not making loads of money. They're not getting rich doing this. A lot of them are like one bloke in a shed kind of enterprises. And it just seemed to strike a chord. And also, as you could, it was probably the longest show he'd recorded to date at that point. And it became, well, this worked. Why don't we try doing a thing together? And obviously he was busy because, it wasn't his day job. And running the magazine and doing my graphic design business was my day job. But we said, well, why don't we get together from time to time and just let it go, no holds barred. Okay, let's do that. What should we call it? And I came up with these two mad characters, the Colonel and the Major. I say, Major, what's going on? And what were the, right, this couple of old officers, out in the Punjab, having a gin and tonic on the veranda. View from the veranda. Let's call it View from the Veranda. That's kind of how it went. And it stuck, And so we did. By the end of it, I think we'd done 12 or 13 of these. It wasn't actually a huge no. It's a bit like if you love Faulty Towers or a TV program like that, you think, oh God, there must have been loads of them. Actually, no, there wasn't. There was only like 1 or 2 seasons or whatever it was. But we did these and it, for whatever reason, people really latched onto them. So that's how the podcasting started. And of course, Neil, the Meeples and Miniatures thing, uh, Neil did loads on his own, and then he occasionally invited his mate, the sadly late,
Yeah.
lovely Mike
Mm.
Hobbs on. And that really became a thing. And of course, with someone else to talk to, the length of Meeples and Miniatures podcast grew. So they were average kind of probably a couple of
Mm.
hours a time for sure. Mike Whitaker got involved as well to a certain extent. Because Mike's people don't know Mike Whitaker. He's at the Peterborough Club, I think it is, isn't he, Mike Whitaker? And so that kind of went off and had a life on its own. But that's how I got started in podcasting. Is bless his heart, thanks to Neil.
Mm.
And then it was, the string of calamitous events that I went through, where running Battle Games magazine on my own with no money behind me, no backing, no security, no nothing, literally nearly bankrupt me by the end of 2011. And I can remember that, oh my God, that day where I realized I had to send an email out to all the subscribers saying, look, I'm really, really sorry about this, but I got to say, I've hung on by my fingernails for as long as I can. The writing is on the wall.
Yeah.
And I may go bankrupt tomorrow. I may have to close the magazine down. I just was honest about it. And I kind of put my tin hat on and dived into my bunker, thinking, "Oh my God, I'm going to be torn to shreds. People are going to hate me forever for this." The response was completely the opposite. I was blown away. The sympathy I got. Oh my God, Henry, that must be so awful for you. Can we help? What can we do to help? And there were certain people who literally wanted to make donations, to help me pay
Wow.
the mortgage, kind of thing. And I said, well, that's really lovely of you, and it might help today, but I wouldn't help me keep it going as a going enterprise. And the word went out in the hobby, and it was, bless his heart, it was actually Andrew, who was the editor of Miniature Wargames at the time, who mentioned to his boss, a guy called Trevor Ridley, who by then owned Miniature Wargames, said, "Oh, you might be interested to know that this magazine's kind of in trouble."
Yeah.
And Trevor said to me, "Oh, I'd like to make you an offer to buy the magazine." And at the same time, I got offers, bless their hearts, to do regular columns for Jasper WSS magazine. And oh God, I've forgotten his name. I've gone totally blank here. Wargames Illustrated, Dan at Wargames Illustrated.
Yeah.
But all they could offer was a regular column slot. Whereas
Yeah.
what happened was Trevor Ridley said, "I'll tell you what, I'll buy the magazine off you." And Andrew, bless his heart, had said to Trevor, "Oh, Battle Games kind of equals Henry. You take Henry out of the equation, you're not going to get Battle Games." So Trevor said, "Oh, all right. Well, we'll keep you on as editor and designer of the magazine. So basically, carry on doing what you're doing, but we now own the magazine." Looking back, he paid me a paltry sum to buy the magazine off me. I was so stupid and naive. But it was, beggars can't be choosers. So they bought the magazine, but kept me on as editor designer. So that was 2011. And then what happened was 2013, he said, "Oh, we really like what you've been doing with Battle Games. We're thinking of revamping Miniature War Games for its 100th, whatever edition it was,
Yeah.
special edition. Would you come up with a redesign of the magazine?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." And I came up with this redesign. And he said, "Oh, we really love what you've done here. More than that, we really love what you're doing with Battle Games. What we actually want to do, we've decided, is merge the two magazines, sack Andrew, bless his heart, and keep you on as the editor designer of this new combined magazine."
Yeah.
Well, that didn't exactly make me feel like $1 million on the one hand, but I was desperate to say, "Oh my God, okay, I'll take the job." And I felt crap for Andrew, to be honest, but that's business. And Trevor Ridley was certainly a ruthless businessman. So that was 2013. And then come 2015, he then sold it from under my nose to Warner's, big printing magazine company in Lincolnshire, born in Lincolnshire. And It literally is like I was driving out. I've been to see Arthur Harmon
Mm.
up in London to talk to him about an article, and I was in the car on the way back. My phone rang, and hi Henry, it's Trev. Can you talk? Oh, I pulled over. Oh, Henry, hi. Yeah, you no longer work for me. And I was, what?
Yeah.
Have you just sacked me? Oh, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no. I've sold the magazine to Warner's.
Mm.
Have you? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you won't be hearing from me anymore. Your boss is this bloke called Rob who works at Warner's.
Mm.
So give him a call. And that was it. I was like, you fucking what?
God,
Right?
yeah.
The world of magazines, people, is ruthless. Trust me. So I rang up this bloke, Rob, at Warner's, and said, "Oh, I gather I now work for you." He said, "Oh, yeah, Henry. Yes, should have had more warning. It was all done in a hurry. Sorry about that. Yeah, you were. Just carry on doing what you're doing. We'll give you a little pay rise, 10% pay rise, which is like 10% of bugger all, really. But yeah, give you a bit of a pay rise as an incentive. Just literally, because I have no clue. I do motorbike magazines and stuff. I've got
Mm.
no clue what this thing is. What's wargaming? We ought to get together and have lunch, and you can explain it to me. But so literally, you just carry on doing what you're doing, editing, designing, whatever. And that's how it was for months. And then, kind of end of 2015, he decided right, okay, I can't keep up with this. So he handed over the management of the magazine to this. I'm not going to name any names. This other person
Yeah.
at Warner's who was just a numbers person, didn't give a shit, just wanted to see the numbers going up, didn't care about any of my experience in the hobby,
Mm.
didn't care about the readers, frankly. Just wanted to see the number. And so, oh right, okay, Henry. So now we're no longer going to allow you to design the magazine. We're going to take that in house. That was half my income,
Wow.
right? Wham! And oh yeah, by the way, later in 2016, oh yeah, we're going to put an insert of however 16 pages of fantasy and sci-fi stuff in the middle of the magazine, extra. But
Mm.
you're not going to be the editor of that. You're not going to have any say in what goes on in that. What? Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's going to be this other bloke who we've just recruited from wherever, and he's going to be in charge of that. You're not going to have any say. Oh, and we want more articles about this kind of stuff, less about that. And we don't want you to be doing this, want you to be doing that. Well, I was tearing my hair out.
Mm.
And it was so end of 20, getting towards the end of 2016, September 2016, I that's enough. And I handed in my resignation. Said,
Mm.
that's it, I'm done. And I planned to set up what was then called Gladius Publications and do my own self-published stuff. Then my mum died.
Oh no.
That was November 2016. So, oh, bless your heart, mum, darling, miss you loads.
Mm.
Shit timing, mum.
Yeah.
Just blew my world apart because unbeknown to me, she'd appointed me executor of her will. And
Mm.
I've got step family. And let's just say the next 18 months were very, very ugly.
Mm.
Not a time of my life that I ever want to relive. And my income was shot to pieces. I could hardly work. Basically, I used up all my savings to stay afloat and dipped into my pensions and all the rest of it. It was, financially suicidal. And emerged from it just about thinking, basically, what can I do now? And this thing called Patreon had just kind of got
Mm.
going. And someone I know very well in the self-publishing world, a lovely woman called Joanna Penn, had just started using Patreon to do a podcast of her own and
Mm.
was being pretty successful at it. I mean, she was in a kind of a broader market than I was. But it seemed that Patreon was a good way of reaching people if you had a niche market who knew who you were.
Yeah. Yeah.
No good start. If people were going, who the fuck are you? It's like you wouldn't stand a chance. But if you
Yeah.
already had a tribe, and this is the one thing I'm still incredibly grateful for, the people who first signed up to Battle Games magazine back in 2006, a lot of those same people had stuck with me through thick and thin. Bless your hearts if you're listening. You know
Mm.
who you are. I will be eternally grateful because when I said, oh, might have a go at this Patreon thing, they immediately said, yeah, we'll join in.
Mm.
And within like days of me launching my thing on Patreon, where I was basically saying, "Oh, I don't quite know what I'm going to do. I might do a bit of this, a bit of that." Wham! I had my first 150 followers
Wow.
immediately, right? And it went from being, it might bring in a little bit, to, oh my God, this is, it's not enough to pay all the bills, but it's a serious chunk of income. So what I quickly realized, because asking people, well, what do you, we remember View from the Veranda, Henry, and the Meeples and Miniatures stuff. And so podcasting. So it became a bit of a no brainer. Oh, okay, I'll launch my own podcast. And that's how Battle Chat started, then, because everything I do is, battle games, this, battle games, that. And
Yeah.
what should I call a podcast? Oh, battle chat. Why not Battle
Yeah.
Chat? And now, as you say, I'm soon going to be episode 100. And that's kind of the story. And the
Mm.
Patreon thing, it, it's mad, really, because I've realized there's a limit. I don't think it's ever going to pay the bills completely. You get envious because there's lots of people who are like involved in the music world or the video
Mm.
world or the games world, who are making fortunes off Patreon. People who are making, some people, quite a lot of big names making tens of thousands, some people
Wow.
hundreds of thousands a month off Patreon. But this is where we have to put our tiny bit of the hobby into perspective, right?
Yes, we are a tiny, tiny little group.
Tiny, tiny. But, it helps pay the bills. I'm incredibly grateful. And the people who have stuck with me since day one seem to still be the people who are sticking with me through thick and thin through the Patreon. Sometimes their pledges fluctuate. And it's one of those weird things, because it's all done in dollars. So international exchange rates, as you know, can fluctuate madly. So you can have the same number of people giving you the same amount each month, but what you actually get as the Patreon guy at the end of each month can vary by, it has varied by hundreds of pounds a month when
Big,
things have
big jump.
been really
Yeah.
squiffy between the pound and the dollar.
Mm.
But it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But there you go. So that's how the podcasting got going.
How important, you mentioned it there, but how important was having that fan base? I use that word loosely,
Yeah,
but you know what I mean.
yeah.
To get started.
Oh, massively, massively. I couldn't have done it without it.
Mm,
If I'd just been Joe Schmo, hey, I'm going to do a Patreon, you know, okay, now I've got something like 3,500 followers on Twitter. At the time, I think I had like 2,500 or something.
mm,
Um, but back then, not many people knew about Patreon. And you don't know how many Twitter followers are the, because people hide behind handles quite often, they've got their own online moniker and stuff. So it's like, oh, I've no idea. So it's kind of a leap of faith. But what I now see is those names. I look at the list of my patrons now and compare it with the list of people who were charter subscribers of Battle Games. Like,
mm,
oh, hello, hello,
yeah.
hello, hello.
Mm,
Because I'd established a track record that, and this is something I do take pride in, Ken, that if I do something, I want to do it to the best of my ability. So if I'm producing a magazine, I wanted it to be the best magazine I could make it.
mm,
If I'm doing a podcast, I want it to be the highest quality podcast, edited nicely and all the rest of it, out quickly and all that kind of stuff. And with a and this is something you're probably encountering as well, as and Alex is with the Storm and
mm,
Steel and so forth, is having a distinct voice. How do you give yourself a distinct voice when there's so many people out there now doing YouTube channels and
mm,
podcasting and all the rest of it? The answer is, of course, well, just be yourself. And if you try and second guess what it is that your punters want to hear, you'll second guess yourself out of a job. Because at the
yeah.
end of the day, they've bought into you. They've bought
Yeah.
into your personality. They're interested in the stuff that you want to find out. They're
Mm.
interested in the people that you want to interview. You know, that by investing in you, they get to hear about all this other stuff. And I'm lucky because I've run the magazines. It's given me access to people I couldn't have dreamed. Yeah, okay, Mark Urban's a wargamer, but he's also the diplomatic editor of Newsnight on the BBC.
Yeah.
He has to be, yeah, he has to be very careful
Yeah.
on social media because he gets nutters sending him threats and stuff.
Yeah.
This is I was like, and he made light of it. When I interviewed him, he said, "Oh no, it's a real pleasure. I'm happy to have done it." It's like, wow, it's so lovely. I've, I'm not going to name too many names. People just go and look at the list of people I have managed to interview on my podcast. It's like, wow, I've admired these people for
Mm.
years, and here they are chatting with me on my podcast as an equal. And I remember talking a long time ago, I think probably on View from the Veranda, about imposter syndrome, right?
Yes. Yes.
And it's one of those things that when you get into this kind of world, you can very easily be overwhelmed by, oh, it's just little me. Who am I? Yeah. But on the other hand, it's like, well, hang on a minute, Henry. You're 61 years old. You've been through a lot in life. You've run 2 magazines. You were a magazine editor for 10 years. You've been a professional graphic designer for 30 years. You've been in business one way or another a long time. Of course, people are going to treat you with respect, but sometimes you can lose that, and you're venturing out into a field that you feel a bit unsteady about, a bit nervous in. You go, oh, it's only me, it's only little
Yeah.
me. But that's also where, because of what I've been through in the last couple of years, where the psychology comes in as well. So there you go. That's the
Yeah.
podcasting shtick.
Yeah, I think it's. I've seen a number of podcasts come and go after maybe 2 or 3 episodes
Mm,
sometimes, and y- for me, you kind of have to have, as you say, that style or that content that is you,
yeah,
and hope that people enjoy what you do. Or
yeah.
listening to be offended by you, which seems to be
It's you. You've made me
some.
talk dirty today, Ken.
Yeah, I have. Sorry, I've lowered you to my level, mate. I've
I'm a
lowered
nice
you to
boy,
my level.
really.
So, how do you go about choosing your guests for your podcast?
Oh, it's utterly random. It's like, because the thing that people don't see, I mean, I often have people say, "Oh, you should invite so and so on the podcast, Henry."
Yeah,
Trust me, I've tried.
yeah,
It's literally a numbers game. You send out 10 invitations. If you're lucky, you get 2 people who say, "Oh yeah, I'd love to." And one of them will say, "Oh yeah, I can come on next week." The other one say, "Yeah, February, all right by you?" I say, "Oh crap,
yeah,
it's it's hard. It is hard finding guests because we're in a hobby that's often, the people in it are often introverts.
yeah,
They're they're
yeah.
people
Very
with
true.
dealing
Very
with their
true.
own imposter syndrome. Think, oh
Mm,
God, why would anyone want to listen to me? Oh no, I don't want to. I don't want to be on a public podcast. You can talk to
mm,
me at a show if I'm putting on again. Oh, but no, go on the air. It's this thing. It's almost like being on the radio or the telly in the old days. Oh, going, even though you could look, it doesn't go out live. It said, if there's anything you don't like, I can cut it out, And
yeah,
I might. This is one of those things. I see it's part of my job is to make my guest sound good,
yeah.
and
I agree.
that
I agree.
might involve going in and editing out coughs and splutters and expletives if necessary or whatever, or it's just putting them at ease,
Mm,
making them feel comfortable that I'm not going to bite your head off. I'm not going to deliberately ask you any embarrassing questions. That what would be the point of that? I'm not a TV journalist.
yeah.
And
You're not
that's
trying
why
to
actually
get a gotcha.
exactly. Podcasting is actually strangely much more akin to being a magazine journalist, where you're creating a mood piece. It's a
Mm,
conversation. I think of myself like you might do, like a Michael Parkinson or something like that, where I want to encourage the guest to feel comfortable enough to talk about themselves. If they happen to along the way reveal something about themselves that makes the listener goes, "Oh, I didn't know that," in a good way.
yeah.
Though I don't want them to, "Oh God, I didn't know that." There's a difference there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
too much information kind of thing.
Yeah.
No, if I can encourage my guests to relax and talk freely about stuff, like in the show with Mark Urban the other day, I mean, I was really kind of honored in a way. He really seemed to open up about his experience as a journalist in dangerous places, going to war zones and, the kind of impact that can have on you psychologically and stuff. He didn't have to talk about that. But I thought that actually, wow, I've actually never heard him talk about that anywhere
Yeah.
else before. So that was both fascinating for me and if it and this was the kind of the guy who, if I thought that was fascinating and moving, but also appropriate in the context, I'll let that go through. If
Yeah.
I think, oh, that's fascinating, but oh, I'm not sure that's appropriate, kind of thing, I'll cut it out,
Yeah.
you know. So I think it's being a podcast is a position of responsibility.
Mm.
Because also having done my other podcast, Inside Your Head, about the psychology stuff as well. Again, I was definitely interviewing people there about stuff that goes much deeper,
Mm.
because of my own experience. I've on a thirst for knowledge, a quest for knowledge about my own experience and trying to
Mm.
understand that. And so, but then the people who come to listen to a podcast like that are expecting to hear something a bit more,
Yeah.
slightly uncomfortable, maybe.
And do you find, yeah, I find when I'm doing the podcast that first section, it's about the person I'm talking to,
Yeah.
and I've had a few guests who have been quite. I'm not going to mention names.
Monosyllabic.
Thank you, Henry. You can talk. I can't.
I'm an editor, mate. I'm an editor.
I'm an amateur at this. Uh,
I'm an
the
editor. You're an abattoir. There we go.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, to get them to relax in that part,
Yeah,
it then opens up, and
of
then
course.
by the time you get to the big topic, we're just chatting, as you said, like two
Yeah,
mates in a pub, and that's the perfect level to pitch it at for me.
yeah.
And I think you have space and time within a podcast to explore various things.
Absolutely. I mean, this is why I always open my podcast with the really simple question: Where are you? Tell people your name. Where are you from? Tell us a bit about your early life, where you grew up, how you got into the hobby. And once people are talking about that stuff that is, they're intimately familiar with,
Mm.
they relax.
Yeah.
And yeah, I completely agree. I mean, obviously, I've settled on a format for my show that I've reduced the length of the shows, partly based on the feedback from my own patrons, because I like today, you know, with someone with whom it's easy, I'm quite happy to rabbit for 2, 3, getting on for
4,
4 hours or
5,
whatever it is.
6.
Um, because and that's okay because that's me.
Yeah.
And your audience are happy to listen to longer format podcasts, whereas a lot of my guys have said to me, oh yeah, I'll be honest, I struggle to listen to something that's as long as even 2 hours. Sometimes they're busy people, whatever. And so I've settled on round about 90 minutes to 2 hours as the regular thing.
Yeah.
Once in a blue moon, like when I do my own Q&A sessions,
Mm.
you know, they that's a solo 3.5 hour rant a lot of the
Wow.
time.
Wow.
And that is a challenge, but it's like, well, you've asked for it, guys, right?
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
don't want me to answer all these questions, don't ask them. And you know what I'm like? If I get a hot button, I will blah, 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 right? And I admit it, and it's a strength, but it's also a fault.
Yeah.
It's in psychological terms, it's called oversharing. And it's one of those signs that, oh, perhaps I'm not completely as fixed as I would like to be, is that you ask me a simple question, I can talk for 3 hours nonstop.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's perfect for a podcast.
But there
Perfect
you
for.
go. So that's
Uh,
that's kind of where it is at.
I tend to split anything more than 2 hours into two sections,
Yeah.
and just put them out one after another, and that way, I think people enjoy having something lengthy if they're going to sit down to paint,
Yeah,
which is the most of the feedback I have. Says, "Oh, I'll put this on when I'm painting,"
yeah,
or like we all wargamers can potter is a good
yes,
verb for what
y-
wargamers do in a
yes,
room because
yeah,
we're actually doing nothing. We're moving books
exactly.
around, we're moving figures around, and you've got a couple of people talking in the background about the hobby.
Yeah.
Makes it
And
fun.
let's face it, Christmas is coming. People are taking the Christmas break now. Let it out as a 4-hour special. So
Oh,
people, you're going to have more time at home. They'll be eating their mince pies and drinking their glass of sherry in the background, mate.
oh dear.
They can
Yeah,
always hit pause. This is the thing that always gets me is like when people have complained to me, oh, okay, have you heard of the pause button? Come back and finish it later, whatever.
brilliant. Um,
Because you were asking me about that article I wrote.
yeah, I was, but we started with podcasts and
All
we
right. Okay. We're
we end,
starting
we
with
end,
go on then.
we ended talking again.
All right.
I
You
don't
just
know.
want to pick my brains about how to improve the quality of your bloody podcast, don't you, Ken? Go
Of course, mate.
on.
Give free consultancy. That's the only reason I'm here.
That's right. So far, your bill is 400 quid, mate. I reckon at this rate.
Excellent. Is that 400 Yorkshire pounds or 400? Right. Uh,
Well,
um,
400 Yorkshire pounds, I should say yes, because it's probably about 1,000 quid down south, isn't it?
yeah. Oh, exactly.
You would
But
claim that Yorkshire pounds are worth more.
oh, try buying a drink in London. My word.
Oh, mate, don't tell me.
It's
Oh,
easy.
God.
Easy as buying a house. Easier
Yes.
buying a house. Your podcast seem to have increased in frequency recently. Have you kind of got a second wind for it?
Well, it's partly, but this relates to, my what I've been through in the last 2 or 3 years, mate. And it's like, it's also a feeling of wanting to give people value for money.
Yeah.
That bless their hearts, some of these people, give me X amount of dollars a month,
Yeah.
and I, I feel a deep sense of responsibility and obligation towards my patrons and that's one of the things about that particular relationship with patrons. It's like, patrons used to exist. You think
Mm.
of the 18th century composers or artists or whatever, where they had patrons who would say, I want you to paint my grand
Yes. Yeah.
house,
Yeah.
and I'm going to pay you to paint my grand house, and or I want you to compose me a symphony, and I'm paying you to, and these people are paying me to produce content in the same way as when I ran a magazine, people were paying for the
Mm.
magazine. So I feel a sense of professional obligation. There's no other way of putting it. That if I if I possibly can, I I'm settling on thinking, I'd like to be able to regular as clockwork produce 2 shows a month
Mm.
as a minimum.
Mm.
And if I'm able to find the time to do some extra, blog posting or a little video or whatever extra
Mm.
alongside that, that's what I would feel is a comfortable return on their investment. I think,
Mm.
let's be blunt about it. And that if I'm producing a lot less than that, I would, if I was one of my patrons, I'd go, oh bloody hell, what's happened to Henry? Hang on a minute,
Yeah.
why am I giving him this money every month and not seeing anything for it? And it's business, and I'm not phased by that. I think that's perfectly fair. That if
Mm.
I'm someone's patron, if I can, you know, but the other thing is that's weird because obviously people come and go on
Mm.
Patreon, and I've seen some of my patrons sadly have had to reduce their pledge
Mm.
each month or even disappear completely. Some of them seem to have gone forever. Some of them, sadly, because they're not spring chickens, might have literally gone forever. This
Yeah.
is the reality. Some of them come back. Some of
Mm.
them come back and increase their pledge. Wow, lovely.
Mm.
But the world's a complicated place, and people adjust their hobby spending. They adjust what they're, they look at their bills at the moment. God, I know my other half, Anne, and I were looking at we've just not long signed up with, I think it's Octopus Energy. We looked at our energy bill anticipated for the coming year, electricity and gas combined. something like 4,000 quid
Wow.
for the next 12 months.
Mad.
And the stark realization is we're not alone. Everybody at the moment, thanks to Putin, everybody's going through this. Those of hands up, everyone who didn't realize how much stuff the Ukraine produced before Russia invaded in
Yeah.
terms of oil and gas and coal and fruit and vegetables and wheat. And suddenly, our energy bills have gone through the roof, our shopping, food bills have gone through the roof. This is the stark reality. So, as a podcaster on Patreon, I have to just, I can't blame anyone if they say to me, because if people leave, they're given a little questionnaire, my financial circumstances have changed. Yeah, I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
Occasionally, and it is, thank goodness, only occasionally, someone will tick the box that says, oh, I didn't get as much as I expected from Henry,
Mm.
Oops, sorry about that. But this is the other thing. There are other people on Patreon out there who crank out enormous amounts of content. And that's one of the other things you can go through is like, oh my God, perhaps I should be doing 4 podcasts a month or 8 podcasts a month or 3 podcasts and 2 videos and 6 blog posts. And you can get yourself in a complete panic. But
Mm.
the brutal reality is, would doing that extra content actually bring in more income? Would it bring in more
Mm.
patrons? It's the $1,000,000 question, right? And the fact is, you might only have the same number of patrons, because I know this has happened in the past. I've had patrons say to me, even at this current level of output, "Oh God, I can't keep up with all your output, Henry." Really? And there's someone just recently has messaged me, "Oh yeah, I've just finished listening to episodes 91, 92, 93, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
because I've not I've had to do a catch-up binge." Because a lot of the patrons I have are people who have busy lives. Some of them have, important jobs, don't have many hours in the
Mm.
day. And so sitting down and listening, doing some painting maybe and listening to a podcast is a luxury to them. And so the reason they support me is not because they want to see me crank out 10 podcasts a month.
Mm.
It's because, bless their hearts, for whatever reason, and I might think some of them are deluded, they think I've got an important contribution to make to the hobby.
Do you feel a pressure? Do you feel a pressure having Patreons? It's something I've not done.
Yeah.
There are complications with my job about
Mm.
having second incomes, etc.
Yes, yes.
So it's not something I've gone down. But does it, from somebody who doesn't do it to somebody who does, do you feel a pressure to produce content? And is there a danger that it could? No, I don't think you would for a million years, but
Mm.
for other people, is there a danger that then skews their content to get more of an audience?
Um, that's a really good question. Do I feel pressure to produce content only to the degree that I've just
Yeah,
discussed? A
yeah,
kind of sense of professional obligation that these people are paying me, therefore I owe them something in return. And what I owe them is my professional skill in producing stuff.
mm,
By and large, in recent times, that happens to have been podcasts. People seem more happy to consume podcasts than, say, lengthy blog posts. Um, I kind of I envy people like Alex Southern,
yeah,
or Troy, who does Sonic Sledgehammers,
mm,
his painting videos and stuff. I think that I kind of wish I had the time and the wherewithal to do more stuff on video, because YouTube is an exciting place to be, and it's a really growing place to be. But second to video, audio is also where it's at. But I have to be realistic and say my setup here isn't. I've got too much crap on the war games table too much of the time, and the thought of having to clear it to do another video would be stressful for me.
Mm.
I'll do occasional videos, which I have done, and but I got a huge admiration for Troy and for Alex for what they do, and their setup is perfect for what they do. For me, audio is more manageable, but also I know from the few videos I have done, man, if I think it's hard work editing a podcast,
Yeah.
editing video, I kind of estimate that, okay, if I record an hour's worth of podcast, I will probably spend 2 hours editing it.
Mm.
If it's a video, double that,
Yeah.
right? At least, because there's so many more visual elements to take into account, and the soundtrack, and do you have subtitles and label things and text, and wow, it's a lot of work. I love doing a video because I think there's something about having that video as the end product is hugely satisfying.
Mm.
And then when you get feedback about it through people on YouTube and stuff, it's amazing. But in terms of that sense of pressure, if there's a pressure, what I've learned is most of it's coming from me. I have to say I'm incredibly lucky. There are as I say, very few patrons who have gone off in a huff and say, "Oh, I haven't had as much from Henry as I thought I was going to get," and that's fair enough. If their expectation was that there would be a great deal more, sorry. But what patron am allowed to do is come in for a bit, suck it and see, and then go, "Oh no, I'm going to go over to this bloke who maybe doesn't have my life obligations, who is able to produce 2 videos a week or whatever it happens to be."
Yeah.
I can't do that. I'm a quantity over quality kind of guy, and I will never allow myself to feel pressured into producing more stuff more quickly of a lower quality just to get the numbers up.
Mm.
I'm not interested.
Yeah.
Just not interested.
And have you been approached by people who are maybe trying to push something of their own to get onto your podcast?
Yes.
Yeah. Uh, and how do you feel about that?
Uh, Terribly sorry, I don't do that kind of podcast.
And I think that's the attitude I take as well.
Yeah, you have
Um,
to set boundaries.
yeah,
I've learnt a lot about boundaries in the last couple of years, my God. And one of those boundaries is, you know, nothing against you. Hope your thing, whatever it is, goes well. Good luck to it. I mean, a good example, Andy Callan, who I
mm,
interviewed just yesterday. Obviously, Dan at WI sent me a copy of Nevermind the Bill Hooks.
yeah,
Uh, Great, lovely. But I'm not going to sit there and just do a review of Nevermind the Bill Hooks. I'm not going to spend an hour and a half just talking about Nevermind the Bill Hooks. I'm going to interview Andy Callan as Andy Callan. And we talked a great deal about his back. He's been writing articles for magazines since the
yeah,
1980s. Amazing bloke, fascinating bloke. We spent some time towards the end of the show. Oh, yeah, and you got this thing out that's just come out now. Never mind. Tell us a bit about that. But I'm
yeah,
not going to spend a whole show just bigging up Never Mind the Bill Hooks. Sod that, frankly. I,
yeah,
I'm not. I'm not being paid to do that, and that's not what my listeners want. Yes, and this is one of those interesting things. I'm on that cusp, a bit like Battle Games was running a Patreon gig. It is a commercial enterprise. It is a
mm,
business, but I am not going to act as a commercial for anyone. See the difference,
yeah. And
right?
that's lovely to hear because um, it's a delicate line, isn't it, where an
Yeah.
interview becomes an advertorial,
Yes.
and you've got to try and I think if you set in your own mind that boundary before you do it, and explain that to the person that you're going to speak to,
Yeah.
you've got the boundary.
Yeah.
And when people come on my show, you do the first 3 sections, and then we have the big topic. And if the big
Yeah.
topic is something like a book or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
great. But we're gonna do the three sections. You're gonna do the bloody quiz, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Simple
And
as
this is the
that.
thing, even with someone like Mark Urban, bless his heart, this is why I send out show notes,
Mm,
because then people can see in black and white, oh, the majority of the show is going to be about this, this, this. Oh, right. And then, yeah, of course, we'll talk a bit about your latest,
mm,
like, and I was keen to talk about Red Devils with Mark because it's a brilliant book, fascinating, revealing some stuff that I didn't know, and therefore I bet my listeners didn't know.
mm,
And of course, he's been kind enough to give his time to come on the show. Of course, I'm going to give him a chance to talk about his thing. But it's a bit like, if you're Graham Norton or something on the telly. Yes, of course you're coming on to plug your latest album, your latest book, but I want the majority of the conversation to be
mm.
banter about what it's like to be you in this
Yes.
context,
Yeah.
what it's like in Mark's, what it's like to be a BBC correspondent.
Mm,
Wow, going to these places. How does, all that stuff. Alan and Michael Perry, what's it been like being twin brothers, creating all this stuff that we love?
yeah.
And so my boundary is, of course, you're going to get to talk about your latest shtick,
Mm.
but in return, you're going, I'm giving you the airtime to do that, and in return, you're going to be bloody interesting on my show. And if I get to see your thing before the show, and I think your thing is shit, I'm sorry, the show's cancelled, or
Yeah.
or the show format's going to change, because I will not endorse anything that I think is crap ever.
That's a wonderful, and you can imagine on this podcast that I've got trouble in the past for saying things, and the least we say about Bill Hooks, the better, because my review, an 8 out of 10 review. Andy, bless him, was absolutely fine about it, but
Yeah.
it didn't go down well in the Bill Hooks community, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah, because I hadn't played the game, so I said at the start, I'm
Oh,
reviewing the book. This is and
yeah.
flick through so you can see what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Oh, some people didn't like it. Some people
Oh
didn't
dear,
like
dear,
it.
dear, dear. Oh
Oh,
well, people. This is the modern thing, isn't it? People are allowed to be offended,
oh
right?
yes.
And it's one of those modern things where you could say anything you like, and someone somewhere will deliberately take offense at it. And you know what? Yes, mate, you're allowed to be offended. You go ahead and be offended. Doesn't change my opinion in the
Mm.
slightest.
I've had people offended with my pronunciation. I had one guy who complained that the Yorkshire Gamer podcast was too Yorkshire.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And the best one.
Yeah.
My fictitious what if scenario was not historically accurate.
Okay, that one wins a
Does that
biscuit.
win? Does that win?
That
Has that got the
absolutely is
award?
fantastic.
I
Yeah.
tell you what. I tell you what I'm going to do, Henry. I'm gonna draw a line there because I think it's a nice boundary to talk about the podcasts, and then, if you're willing, at some stage, come back on and talk about that article with me because
All right.
there's so much stuff on there that's I think is really important to
Right.
what we do.
Okay.
As and I don't want to rush it, and I
Okay.
don't.
I will. I think
Honestly,
it's
Henry, I don't think you can rush it.
that's right. I think it would be fair to say, because that's an awful tease.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously stuff that I included in what I wrote, and it's stuff I've talked about openly and publicly before,
Mm,
but just some people hadn't seen it. I talked about my experience having prostate cancer. I talked about my experience having a mental breakdown. I
yeah.
talked about my experience recovering from both those things.
Mm,
And uh, from my perspective, I'm more than happy to talk about that stuff. I think you're probably right. It's probably about time that we said, "Cool, blimey, need some dinner."
right.
But I will just say before we go that I am unrepentant in believing that we must talk about these things that so many men in particular find very embarrassing,
Yeah.
because I was incredibly lucky that a chance test for diabetes actually
Mm,
led to me discovering that I had very aggressive prostate cancer that could have killed me,
mm,
and that therefore that made me realize, wow, I hardly knew anything about prostate cancer. Why? Because no one talks about it, and that's a terrible thing. If me talking about prostate cancer can save one life, it's worth me talking about it. Also, then when it came to like the psychological toll of having cancer
mm,
and the drugs they put me on for cancer, and what led to in January 21,
mm,
I can only describe it as a mental breakdown. I thought about killing myself, and the journey I've been on recovering from that, which includes therapy, which I'm not remotely embarrassed about talking about, because again, saved my life. Learning about how the our minds work, getting proper therapy saved my life. And
mm,
again, wow, if it helped me, I bet this will help someone else as well.
mm,
And all I can, the response I've had to what I've said publicly about both those things has confirmed my belief that I've done the right thing in speaking out about
mm.
those things. I'm summarizing
No,
massively here.
I think it's important that if you're willing that we talk about this at
Sure.
much more length, because my job dealing with death
Yeah.
every single day of
Yeah.
of my life um, has affected my mental health in many ways.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, 3 or 4 weeks ago, a friend of mine decided to kill themselves because
Oh,
they'd had enough.
oh, Ken, sorry to
And
hear that.
it is important, as you say, to talk about these things. And if two old guys who are war gamers talk about this sort of stuff,
Yeah.
and it gets through to even 10% of my audience, then
Yep.
I will be proud of the fact that I've done it. So I
Yep.
would be grateful if you would come back on in the future, Henry,
Of
and we
course.
talk about
Of
that.
course. Absolutely
Lovely.
without question. Yep.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, so much for taking your entire afternoon up talking to me. And it's been a pleasure as always. I really genuinely enjoy talking to you all when we
You
meet up,
too, Ken.
Henry. It's been brilliant. So we will call this half time, and we will be back sometime in the future. Would you just like to say good
Fantastic.
night to everyone, Henry?
Yeah, thanks everyone, seriously, for putting up with me for the last 4 hours or whatever it's been. And Ken, mate, seriously, it's really nice when you kind of, you kind of click with someone
Yeah,
uh, in any context in life, in our hobby, in real life in general. I think that's the thing that, I think that even though you live in the wild north of Yorkshire,
bleak
and I'm down
north
in
and
the
north.
balmy south, or is it just balmy
Yeah,
south? It's really nice to have got to know you better, and I'm sure that this is a relationship in and out of war game that is going to continue hopefully for many years to come, mate. So thanks for so much for having me on the show.
lovely words, Henry. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone. So there you have it, a lovely chat with Henry Hyde. And I'm having a little giggle because some people are going to look at this and go, a podcast with Henry under 2 hours. It's only 1 hour and 48. Little do they realise that this is part two of the podcast. And, you don't want people coming on your podcast and not talking. So, Henry is always a joy to have on board. And I think we covered a lot of topics there that maybe he hasn't gone through before. And we certainly had a really, really good laugh. I'd very much enjoyed talking to Henry. And I hope that shone through in these 2 episodes that you've been listening to over recent weeks. And it's not over yet. Oh my Jove. It is the 16th of December, so we are not far off Christmas at all, less than 10 days. But I have another episode, fingers crossed, that will be coming out next Friday and or maybe next Thursday. Let's see how it goes. And that is the Brews in the Vineyard Christmas special with Alex and Sean that I mentioned at the start of this episode. And we had a few technical difficulties with Sean's recordings, and some bits are missing from them. So it's just proven a little bit tricky at the moment putting it together as a show. But I will rescue something from it because there's too many good bits in it not to. So enjoy this episode. Try and get it listened to this week because there will be another one on Friday. And then the Yorkshire Gamer Awards will be released between Christmas and the New Year. The Golden Puddings, as they are known. And as you can imagine from my previous content for the last 2 years, it is deadly serious and, you know, all very hush hush, all very, you know, envelopes being opened in secret, that sort of thing. Yeah, of course it is. So, until next time, see they.